Eric was happy about his new apartment on the top floor, spacious, bright, and, what was especially appealing to him, quiet. The first night in the new place, however, was not as peaceful as he had hoped. In the middle of the night he was awakened by strange sounds coming from somewhere above. Footsteps, as if someone was walking right above his head. Eric first thought it might be the neighbors, but remembered that it was only the roof above him. All the next day he tried to forget about it, writing it off to fatigue and imagination. But the next nights the footsteps repeated themselves, slow, insistent, almost frightening. Sometimes they were accompanied by quiet, barely audible moans, as if from someone in agony. Finally, unable to bear it, Eric decided to talk to the neighbors. He met an elderly man, Tom, who lived a floor below. Eric cautiously asked him if he could hear these strange noises at night. "I do," Tom answered quietly, as if he didn't want to discuss the subject. "This is a strange place, especially this apartment on the top floor." Eric frowned, waiting for an explanation. Tom sighed and continued. "A year ago, a guy named Kevin lived in that apartment. Quiet, unassuming. Never talked to anyone much, but he said he heard footsteps and screams at night. Nobody believed him at the time. After a while, Tom was silent for a second. He climbed up on the roof and jumped off. Eric felt a chill run down his spine. After that, Tom continued, the other tenants started to hear the sound. The neighbors are convinced it's Kevin's spirit, and he still haunts the roof, returning every time he goes up there. Eric stared at Tom in silence, feeling the fear tightening inside him. James Rivers has always considered himself a person who easily adapts to any conditions. Having recently moved to a new city, he was determined to make a fresh start. He was offered a spacious apartment in an old building that, despite its aging architecture, retained a certain elegance. It seemed like a good opportunity for James. The rent was inexpensive, and the neighborhood itself wasn't so bad. His new apartment was on the 5th floor, with large windows through which he could watch the hustle and bustle of the street. James settled in quickly. He unpacked, arranged the minimalist furniture, and immediately felt that this place could be called home. Things went smoothly for the first couple days. No unpleasant surprises, just a lingering, almost ringing silence, as if the house was holding its breath. But then James noticed something strange. It started when he noticed a woman. She was standing in one of the windows across the street, in the building that was directly across the street. James could make out her silhouette, but not her face. She was standing still, looking in his direction. He didn't notice it right away, thinking it was just a coincidence, but the next night she was there again, motionless and silent. James thought that maybe she was just waiting for someone. He didn't even notice that her figure seemed strangely familiar. On the 3rd day, when James came home again, he saw her in the same window. She stood there, unmoving, as if absorbed in something beyond his perception. James couldn't understand why he couldn't take his eyes off her figure. It was something hypnotic. As evening descended, James closed the curtains, determined not to look at the woman again. But the next morning, when he opened them again, she was there as always. Only this time she took a step forward so James could see her more clearly. Black hair, white dress, and there was something strange in her eyes that made James feel a chill run down his spine. After a few days of restless observation, James decided to take a different approach. He tried to ignore the woman, though the anxiety was increasingly engulfing him. One evening as he sat on the couch, his phone suddenly vibrated. It was a short message from an unfamiliar number. "Can you see her?" James was instantly alert. Did someone know he was watching this woman? But how was that possible? He hadn't even told anyone about his strange feelings about his roommate. The stranger wrote another message. "Open the curtains so you don't disturb her watching." James felt paranoia overwhelm him. He replied to the, "Who are you?" And a second later I got a new text. "You should know who I am by now. It's going to be the same as always." James tossed the phone on the table and walked quickly to the window. The curtains were closed, but as soon as he opened them, his gaze met those very eyes again, cold, black, devoid of emotion. She was there, just as she had always been, but now she couldn't see her face, only the shadow that filled her features. Days later, James couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. He believed it was all just paranoia, but the weirdness continued to multiply. Everything around him was starting to change. Objects in his apartment began to move. The table was in a slightly different place than where he had left it. The books on the shelf were in the wrong places, and even in the bathroom he noticed that the towel was folded a little differently. He tried not to think about it, but the feelings of unease grew. One night, in an attempt to break this restless cycle, James decided to get up and go outside. He headed in the direction of the building he thought the woman was in. As he approached the entryway, he couldn't believe his eyes. The house was completely empty. The doors and windows were boarded up, and everything inside was deserted. James didn't understand how this was possible. He had seen a woman there. He was sure he had seen her. The situation was becoming more unbearable by the day. James was sure that she was watching him through more than just the window. One evening, sitting in his apartment, he opened the photo album on his phone, and there, among the old pictures, he found a couple of photos that showed him standing at the window, as if in slow motion, but other pictures showed him watching the woman. How could he have gotten into these pictures? These pictures were clearly not taken by him. But how? Could someone have taken the pictures without his knowledge? And the strangest thing is that in each of the photos, the woman in the window was with him. But he never took a picture of her. Finding himself desperate, James walked back to the building where he had seen the woman, hoping to find answers. He peered into the dark entryway and felt something strange squeeze his chest. The silence was unbroken. Suddenly he heard a slight sound, as if someone had taken a light step behind him. He turned around, but there was no one there. However, there was a new picture on the wall. It was a picture taken more recently. It showed James standing at his window, but it wasn't the same apartment. It was a picture of the very building across the street, and there was his own shadow in the window. The realization came too late. The woman in the window was not of this world. She wasn't just a neighbor, but someone or something that was watching James, and she was waiting for him to become part of her story. The story could have started with a young woman named Emily moving into an old apartment in an apartment building known for its ancient architecture and, as it later turns out, mysterious atmosphere. Emily immediately fell in love with the cozy old features of the apartment: high ceilings, massive wooden doors, and large windows. The first few weeks passed quietly, until one day, returning late at night, she noticed something strange. In the hallway, near her bedroom, a strange keyhole appeared right on the wall. It was clearly not part of the original interior, as if someone had carved it into the wall overnight. At first Emily thought it was her tired mind playing tricks on her, but every time she returned to the spot, the keyhole remained in place. Another day her interest overcame her fear, and she squinted and peered cautiously through the keyhole. Through it she saw a small room illuminated by a dim reddish light. The room seemed almost empty, just old furniture covered in a layer of dust and a massive armchair in the corner. Over the next few days, Emily noticed more and more strange things. Each time she peeked through the keyhole, the room looked a little different. The light changed, the setting seemed hazy or more distinct, as if she were looking into a place that didn't fully exist. One night, the night before her dream, she was seized by a strange urge to peer in again. This time there was a dark figure sitting in a chair. It seemed motionless, but its presence was palpably frightening. Emily's heart raced, and she pulled away from the wall, frozen in place, listening to the sounds that seemed to come from there. Another day passed, but Emily couldn't shake the thought that someone or something was really behind the wall. Deciding that it was only imagination, she went back to the well again after all. The room was empty again, but this time she noticed something strange. There were dark spots on the wall on the other side, like claw marks. Emily felt inexplicably uneasy. but her inner desire to understand what was going on compelled her to keep peeking. Each time she peeked, the room changed slightly. Sometimes it was just different furniture, sometimes darker lighting. After a few days, Emily noticed that the keyhole seemed to react to her presence. One evening when she looked in again, she saw in the reflection of her own eye a dark silhouette standing behind her. She turned around sharply, but the room was empty. Frightened, Emily decided to leave the place, but she couldn't shake the anxiety and the feeling that she was being watched. The final straw came in the evening when she heard faint footsteps from the hallway leading to the bedroom. Raising her head, she felt an irresistible urge to check the well one last time. Looking in, she saw the reflection of her own face, but the expression on it was alien, distorted. This double began to move, though she stood still, and it seemed to her that he was slowly raising his hand as if trying to reach her.